To truly grasp what unfolds on a spiritual level when a narcissist loses an empath, we have to begin with a basic truth that is often ignored in psychological conversations about these dynamics. This is not merely about losing a partner or even about losing narcissistic supply. It is about losing the narcissistic's only genuine bridge to the divine, to transcendence, to the spiritual dimension of being human, because it touches something crucial about how the narcissist actually relates to spiritual reality. By the very structure of their pathology, the narcissist is severed from direct spiritual experience. Their entire psychological system is built around guarding against vulnerability, protecting grandiosity, and avoiding authentic emotion. Yet true spiritual experience requires connection to something greater than the ego. Moments of transcendence, the lived sense of love as a universal force. All of this demands exactly what the narcissist cannot permit: the surrender of the defended self, openness to being changed by something beyond their control, and the willingness to feel awe and smallness before mystery. And as a result, the narcissist lives in a kind of spiritual wasteland. They are disconnected from the numinous, from the sacred, from those flashes of grace, beauty, and meaning that give human life spiritual depth. They may adopt a religious or spiritual identity, attending services, speaking in sacred language, even occupying roles of spiritual leadership, but there is no authentic inner experience beneath the display. It becomes part of the grandiose facade, the carefully constructed image, just another stage for asserting superiority. And then the empath comes into their life, bringing something the narcissist cannot produce alone, a living, embodied link to spiritual depth. The empath has the ability to love genuinely, not as a bargain or performance, but as a who are empaths spiritually and emotionally way of being, a heart-centered openness that connects them to something beyond themselves. They can encounter beauty and be deeply moved. They can feel compassion and allow it to reshape them. They can touch transcendence through art, nature, relationship, even suffering. They are spiritually awake in a way the narcissist simply is not. They are spiritually alive. And in the presence of the empath, the narcissist can experience these spiritual dimensions indirectly. They witness love through the empath's capacity for it. They approach transcendence through the empath's access to it. They sense something resembling spiritual depth by being near someone who truly embodies it. The empath becomes, in essence, the narcissist's mediator to the divine, not in an inflated religious sense, but in the simple and profound way that the empath provides entry to spiritual realities the narcissist cannot reach on their own. And consider how this appears in everyday life. The empath takes the narcissist to a breathtaking natural landscape and feels sincere awe, genuine reverence for the sacredness of what they see. The narcissist cannot feel this directly. Their defenses block it. Yet by observing the empath's authentic reaction, they can approximate the experience. They can say, yes, this is beautiful, and almost believe it, because the empath's real emotion creates a kind of borrowed resonance. Or the empath loves the narcissist with a quality of unconditional acceptance that brushes against something divine. The ability to see someone completely and still choose love. The narcissist cannot generate this type of love themselves and cannot fully receive it without their defenses interfering. Yet they can encounter it at the edges through the empath's offering. In those moments, they touch something that feels close to grace, similar to the spiritual love described in sacred traditions, or the empath finds meaning in suffering. Why narcissists are drawn to empath, turning pain into growth, discovering beauty within brokenness. The narcissist, who typically experiences suffering only as narcissistic injury to be defended against, can observe through the empath that pain can be held differently. It can become spiritually generative rather than purely destructive. And the empath continually demonstrates what spiritual vitality looks like, what it means to access aspects of human experience that the narcissist's pathology has severed them from. Through witnessing and proximity, the narcissist acquires a kind of borrowed spiritual existence. They are not engaging in the inner transformation that would cultivate genuine spiritual capacity, but they remain close enough to someone who has done that work to taste its results indirectly. And this explains why, the relationship with the empath often feels distinct to the narcissist compared to others. It is not only that the empath offers superior supply, though that is true. It is that they grant access to something the narcissist cannot otherwise reach. The spiritual richness of authentic human depth, real love, and transcendent meaning. And but here lies the devastating spiritual outcome. When the empath departs, that doorway shuts, abruptly and completely. The narcissist's only conduit to divine experience is gone. They return to the spiritual desert they have always inhabited, but now with awareness of what they have lost. They know what it felt like to stand near someone who could reach spiritual depth, who could create genuine love, who could turn ordinary moments into something sacred through presence and attention. And they have tasted closeness to the divine, even if it was always borrowed, always secondhand, and now it has vanished. The empath has taken their spiritual vitality with them. The narcissist is left in a form of isolation, the emotional and spiritual role of empaths. That is not merely emotional or psychological, but fundamentally spiritual. They are cut off from the very layers of human experience that make life meaningful, that connect us to something greater than our small, defended selves. This kind of loss operates on a level entirely different from anything we have discussed in purely psychological terms. It is not simply loneliness or the lack of supply. It is a profound form of spiritual isolation. It is the awareness that there are depths of experience, realms of love, meaning, and beauty you cannot reach by yourself and can no longer reach through someone else. When your only bridge was another person's soul, their leaving does not just make you alone. It leaves you spiritually exiled. And to understand what unfolds spiritually when the narcissist loses the empath, we have to speak about light and shadow, not as vague metaphors, but as genuine forces within the spiritual dynamics of human relationships. The empath carries a distinct kind of light. This is more than warmth or kindness, though it includes both. It is a spiritual brightness that arises from their ability to stay open-hearted despite pain, to choose love despite fear, and to remain connected to something transcendent even in darkness. The empath's presence genuinely illuminates the spaces they enter. Others feel it. The narcissist certainly feels it. And here is what is essential to recognize in the empath's presence. The narcissist could rest in that light without creating any of their own. They could stand near spiritual depth, genuine love, and transcendent meaning without doing the inner labor required to access these states independently. The empath's light was steady and strong enough to create the illusion that the narcissist too belonged in that luminous realm, and consider what this meant in everyday life for the narcissist. Around the empath, they could experience moments of beauty, connection, even something close to grace. The empath's sense of wonder made ordinary experiences feel significant. Their emotional depth produced the impression of shared spiritual meaning. Their compassion and forgiveness allowed the narcissist to sustain the fantasy that they were fundamentally good and truly capable of love. The empath's light shone so brightly that it pushed the narcissist's shadow out of sight, making it easy to deny. As long as the empath remained there, radiating that spiritual glow, the narcissist did not have to face their own inner darkness. They could stand in reflected light and mistake it for their own. And then the empath leaves, and this is where the spiritual impact becomes devastating. When that sustaining light withdraws, when the empath's presence is no longer there to both illuminate and conceal, the narcissist is abruptly confronted with their own shadow in a way they have long avoided. The darkness they have been running from, the spiritual emptiness they have denied, the hollow space where authentic presence should exist, all of it becomes starkly visible once the empath's light is gone. And this realization is rarely gradual. It feels like a spiritual crisis, a sudden drop into darkness that seems catastrophic. The narcissist has lived in borrowed light for so long that they have forgotten, or perhaps never truly known, what their inner world actually contains. What they encounter in the empath's absence is frightening. There is no internal flame to sustain them, no spiritual center to return to, only emptiness and shadow. The accumulated weight of years or even decades of emotional avoidance and spiritual bypassing. And the intensity comes from contrast. Had the narcissist never experienced the empath's light, the spiritual awakening of an empath, They might have remained relatively comfortable in their darkness, unaware that anything else was possible. But they have tasted what it is like to stand near genuine spiritual presence. They have felt love, depth, meaning, and transcendence, even if only as borrowed experiences rather than self-generated ones. And now they are back in the dark, but with the memory of light. They carry the awareness of spiritual warmth along with the painful recognition of what they have lost and what they never truly cultivated within themselves. This form of spiritual suffering is nearly impossible to express or resolve because the narcissist cannot return to unconscious darkness. They have seen the light. Yet they also cannot produce their own inner light because they have avoided the work required to develop it. And for years, perhaps a lifetime, they have constructed defenses against the vulnerability and radical honesty that spiritual growth demands. Now they are trapped, aware of light but unable to create it, conscious of darkness yet unwilling to undertake the shadow work necessary to integrate it. They know it is missing, but they cannot reach it through their own inner resources, and the person who once provided access is gone. And the empath's departure forces the narcissist into a painful reckoning with their own spiritual emptiness. This confrontation is so threatening to their entire defensive structure that they usually respond in one of two ways. Either they dive deeper into denial, desperately searching for new sources of borrowed light to avoid facing their inner void, or they sink into a form of spiritual despair that resembles depression, but is actually the soul protesting its own neglect. Neither reaction leads to healing, because both still avoid the essential spiritual task. And that task would require turning toward their shadow, sitting in their own darkness, and undertaking the agonizing inner work of cultivating light from within. The empath's presence allowed them to postpone this labor indefinitely. The empath's absence makes it unavoidable. And when faced with this spiritual reckoning, why narcissists feel emotional emptiness after losing empaths, the narcissist almost always chooses continued avoidance over authentic transformation, because true change would demand everything they have spent their lives defending against: vulnerability, honesty, dismantling the false self, and integrating the parts they have long disowned. What had once been concealed does not simply remain hidden. It grows stronger because now it is darkness, accompanied by awareness, emptiness paired with the memory of fullness, spiritual poverty mixed with the knowledge of what abundance feels like. The narcissist becomes spiritually destitute in a way that can no longer be denied. And that awareness, without any willingness to change, turns into its own torment. When the light that once masked your darkness withdraws, you finally see what you have been running from, and seeing it changes nothing if you still refuse to heal. And yet, the spiritual consequences of losing the empathy extend beyond merely confronting inner darkness. Something else is unfolding at a level deeper than psychology. Something governed by spiritual laws that operate whether we consciously acknowledge them or not. This is the principle of karmic return, the universal movement toward balance, reciprocity, reciprocity, and consequence. And it is important to clarify this because karma is often misunderstood as a cosmic punishment system or divine revenge for wrongdoing. That is not the meaning here. Karma, in its truest sense, is simply the law of cause and effect functioning at the level of energy, intention, and action. What you send out into the world creates ripples that eventually return to you, not because the universe is judging you, but because that is how energy naturally behaves. And for years, perhaps for an entire lifetime, the narcissist has operated in ways that generate harm. They manipulate, deceive, take without reciprocating, and injure others to defend their fragile ego. All of this builds karmic debt, an energetic imbalance that seeks correction, consequences that flow organically from destructive behavior. But here is what the empath was doing, often without realizing it. They were absorbing and softening those consequences. They took the impact of the narcissist's harmful actions and filtered it through their own forgiveness, empathy, and unconditional love. In many ways, they stood between the narcissist and the natural return of their own destructive energy. And practically speaking, this looked like the following. When the narcissist lied to Dio, the empath believed them, shielding them from the natural consequence of broken trust. When the narcissist raged, the empath absorbed the fury without retaliating, preventing the escalation that anger typically produces. When betrayal occurred, the empath forgave repeatedly, postponing the abandonment that betrayal usually guarantees. When harm was done fidei, the empath pursued one far. Ath made excuses, protected reputations, and stopped others from seeing the full extent of the damage. And the empath functioned as a kind of karmic shock absorber, taking consequences that should have returned directly to the narcissist and transforming them into something gentler, something manageable, something the narcissist could continue to ignore. This was not healthy for the empath. We recognize that clearly. But spiritually, it served a purpose for the narcissist. It allowed destructive patterns to continue without the full impact of natural consequences. It delayed the universe's tendency toward equilibrium and created a protective cushion that insulated the narcissist from the energetic return of their own actions. And when the empath leaves, when they finally choose themselves and walk away, that cushion disappears. What often follows is what might be called karmic acceleration, the delayed consequences, the accumulated energetic debt. The natural returns that had been softened or deflected begin to surface with striking speed, and externally this may appear as a rapid unraveling. Relationships once thought stable collapse. Professional situations that seemed secure begin to deteriorate. People who tolerated them for years suddenly establish boundaries or exit entirely. Secrets once hidden come into view. Lies that seemed safely maintained are exposed. The structure they built begins to crumble, and it often does so quickly. And from the outside, this can look like coincidence or misfortune. The narcissist will almost certainly interpret it that way, casting themselves as the victim of circumstances, other people's flaws, or an unjust universe. Yet what is truly happening is the completion of natural cycles. Consequences are finally allowed to run their course. The empath's departure frequently marks an inflection point where the spiritual protection they knowingly provided is withdrawn, and the narcissist must face the cumulative weight of their own decisions. And this is not punishment. It is the restoration of balance, the correction of an imbalance that the empath's presence had been sustaining. That is why the period following the loss of an empath often feels especially chaotic and destructive for the narcissist. It is not merely the loss of one relationship, it is the removal of a spiritual shield that had been protecting them from the natural consequences of their behavior across many areas of life. And there is another layer to this that is deeply significant. Throughout the relationship, the narcissist was repeatedly given opportunities to change direction, to choose growth over defense, to transform destructive patterns before consequences intensified. In this sense, the empath was offering more than love. They were offering the possibility of redemption. They created an environment of radical acceptance in which real change could have taken place. And each act of forgiveness was an invitation. You can choose differently, you can heal. There is space here for transformation. But those invitations were declined again and again. The narcissist mistook grace for permission to remain the same. They interpreted patience as evidence that change was unnecessary. They used unconditional love as justification for conditional behavior. And so when the empath leaves, they are not only withdrawing their physical presence, they are withdrawing the spiritual grace period they had been extending, the buffer that softened consequences and held open the door to transformation.